Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Secrets. I'm your host, Austin Hare. Today, our guest is Bill Neumann. Bill is CEO and co-founder of Group Dentistry Now. It's an online publication that's been running since 2014. He's also on the board of a startup DSO based in Canada, which has some locations in the US, and he's on the board of directors for Cure-mint, which is a procurement platform. This, among a few other titles as well. Too many to name almost. So it's a really big pleasure to have you on the show, Bill. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going great. Thanks, Austin, for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you and the audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's cool. So yeah, tell us your story. Like, how did you get involved in this industry? Was it something that you knew you wanted to do when you were younger? I mean, did it relate to your first job or anything like that?
No, definitely not when I was younger. I didn't think I'd be in dentistry. I had a financial management degree, got out of college and interned for an accounting firm in the summer and realized I didn't want to spend the next 30 years crunching numbers. So got into sales, had a couple B2B positions, and then ended up working for a dental manufacturer, a Swiss company called Coltine Whale Dent.
Oh,
Uh, Worked for them in a sales role, then became their national sales trainer, and then was a regional manager there for a while. Always had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. Started a platform back in 2008 called Dental Sales Pro, which was a networking website to connect dental manufacturers and dental distributors. Got a little wind behind it, and Medical Publisher acquired it in 2010, and that's how I got into the publishing game. So they had one dental magazine at the time, and helped them launch a second dental magazine that was going to dental group practices. Nobody called them DSOs then. It was around 2012. And then left there because I wasn't really interested in being involved in a print publication when the future's digital. So with another person with Kim Larson, started Group Dentistry Now in 2014, 2015 timeframe.
nice. So the publication that you left in 2012, were they able to pivot to be online, or did they stick to the print like
They still have print. I'm not sure really what they're doing now, quite frankly.
Well, sounds like you got out just in time.
Yeah. It's. You see what's going on with newspapers and print publications. It's really hard from the perspective of running a publication to show ROI, right? I mean, we know we can measure things online. We can't really do that through print advertising. So really, it was a tough sale.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. So yeah, what was that like? I mean, a lot of people have aspirations, I think, to start their own company, and specifically like a publication. It seems like it's just a fun job. You just write all the time and pursue your passion. In reality, what was that process like from, sort of taking a dive off the cliff?
Yeah, I'll definitely dive off a cliff for sure. It's an interesting thing because it might sound like a lot of fun, but publishing is a grind. I mean that in the best way possible, but it's all content creation. You have to really try and find things that are interesting for the audience to talk about. In a digital world, we have so many different distractions. So to get somebody to spend 7 minutes on an article, good luck. So if you can get 2 or 3 minutes of their time, you're in good shape. And then selling the value to, of course, people that support it, which would be your advertisers. And we've been pretty successful at doing that. But it's really having the right audience, and where it once was a niche, DSOs and group practices, of course, is being on the real estate side of things, the consolidation in the industry really continues, and there's certainly a lot more buying power that these DSOs have that maybe the solos don't have, and different needs, right? Because you're not just a clinician, you've got procurement people, and you have real estate managers, and so it's really a different mindset. So companies in the industry really have to pivot and not just be, a lot where I came from, we were very clinically focused, but you had to understand the business proposition or the value prop from a business perspective as well.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So and then were you creating this content yourself? Like, were you a writer, or were you outsourcing that, or what did that look like?
Yeah, we wrote a lot of it ourselves. Yeah, Kim and myself created 90% of the content.
Are you still doing that today?
Yeah, we are to a large degree. We've got some people that help us out now. created some great relationships with industry experts. I'm not an expert on HR. I'm not an expert on real estate. So you find the people that are, and then you really, you let them take over.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, what was the landscape like in 2014 when you guys started this? I know you said for a time they didn't even call it a DSO. When
Yeah.
did that term get coined?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I mean, I think mostly everybody knows who the ADSO is. If some people in your audience don't, that's the Association of Dental Support Organizations. So I think it was around 2015, 2016. Maybe it wasn't even that long ago. They used to be called the DGPA, the Dental Group Practice Association. So somebody at the ADSO, and I don't know who it was, decided that dental group, just because I would say 5, 6 years ago, DSOs weren't really, or group practices back then weren't looked at in the best light for whatever reason. So the practitioners were competing against them. They didn't like it. The big corporate guys are coming and gals are coming in, and they were eating their lunch in certain markets. So I think part of it was rebranding. And so support is a little bit softer. Although now you hear dental group practice kind of coming back into vogue again. So it was really a little bit of rebranding. It was, like I said, back in probably 2015, 2016 time, it started the nomenclature changed. And there's still some practices that want to be called a dental group practice instead of a DSO. So it doesn't really mean much. You could have a DSO with 3 locations, or you could have somebody who wants to be called a dental group practice and have 50 locations. So
Right.
Just depends on the perception.
And the way that you slice it can be different too, right? I mean, you can have full ownership, you can have partial ownership. There's like DSOs that own other DSOs. So yeah, it can get increasingly complicated.
Yeah, and it's like a DSO means one thing to one person and a different thing to another person. So what I would, if you interviewed a lawyer who was setting up that structure, really it's a separate business, right? Separate legal structure set up to support the clinicians, right? So the clinicians are over here in one side, which is the PC, and so the clinician owns the practice, and then you have this other legal entity that supports the DSO or supports the practices, but they don't do anything clinical there. So it's really interesting how it works and how people kind of think of things a little bit differently. So it just depends on who you talk to.
Yeah, that's good. So back in 2014, 2015 era, who were some of the guys that you were following at the time? Because I think like the sheer number of them has just taken off exponentially.
Yeah, so I mean, there were a lot of the names that you still see now, like certainly the Pacific Dental and Stephen Thorne and what he was doing there and still is doing. Bob Fontana over at Aspen Dental Management there, and then Steve Bild over at Smile Brands. I mean, they were all pretty much doing what they're doing now. Rick Workman, now he's the chairman of the board, and Pat Bowers really taken over on a day-to-day basis, but. Those were and still are some of the big entities. But I think what you see that's changed as you see a lot of these dentist owned and dentist run DSOs. So what I mean by that is, you don't have necessarily an MBA that's the CEO, or you don't have a non-clinician that's running the business. You have clinicians that are actually operators, so whether the COO or the CEO, they don't have a title, but they have 10, 15, 30 locations. So I think that you see a lot more of these emerging groups popping up, and depending on who you talk to, there may be 800 platforms from 3 to 30 or 40 locations. So there's quite a few of the smaller groups out there.
You think there's about 800 DSOs?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you hear kicked around. I mean, the number varies depending on who you talk to and how they break that out. Is it 3 to 20? Is it 3 to 30? But that's the number you hear. And then at the larger practice level, the NDSOs or the national DSOs, you hear anywhere from about 25 to about 35, and that would be over 150 locations.
So from your perspective, how have you seen the real estate affect the success of DSOs?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. First off, I think a lot of the real estate choices have to do with the model that they have, right? So if you're in Aspen Dental, of course, you're de novo. So you're looking typically at a retail space where you've got some anchor stores. They may be looking at being somewhere near a Walmart or a McDonald's or something like that, or maybe in a higher end area. And so they can do that. And now even Aspen has they have ownership in Now, the urgent care clinic. So what they're typically doing is they're co-locating, so and almost doubling that buying power, right? So they'll put a Now urgent care clinic and they'll put an Aspen in the same retail area and be able to negotiate the rates down. So that's one model, which is the de novo. And then the other is it's like, well, hey, we're going to buy a practice, and so the value of that practice that they're buying can really vary on the location of that practice, right? Where that practice is located in the real estate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's what we see too. Like you said, everybody's got their niche. You have to have a niche. So depending on, if you're going like the Medicare, Medicaid versus PPO versus pediatrics, there's all going to determine what location you're in. But then also there's varying levels of which you can participate in the real estate too. Like Pacific Dental, they've done a really good job with their development arm, which is where they go in and they buy the real estate separately from their practice. Like they'll purchase the location with they've got a development fund, and then they'll put their operations in the building, and then that creates that value, and they can go turn around and sell it and recapitalize if they want to. A lot of times we kind of recommend people to not necessarily buy their real estate if they are trying to grow, like especially if you're a DSO and your main factor is growth, because real estate it'll give you a good return, right? It'll give you a good percentage. But when you're looking at multiple and increasing your multiple of EBITDA from a 6 to something like a 12, I mean, you're talking really, really big upside. So your capital is going to be, for the most part, better spent reinvesting in the business if you can help it. You have any opinion on that?
That's a great point, and you hear that a lot where the DSOs don't want to own the real estate. So if they're acquiring a practice and the doc owns it, they'll turn around and they'll sell it, or they create a separate company that manages the real estate, because in the end, or if you're a DSO, it's not your area of expertise typically. So find somebody that really understands how to handle that.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think there's such a disparity between like the top four? I mean, really, you've got Aspen Dental, Pacific Dental, Heartland, and then Smile Brands, which I think is up to 650 locations now, or is it higher? I'm not sure, but but there's 650 to like 1,000 locations, somewhere between those four, and then compared to everybody else, they're head and shoulders above the rest. What do you think caused that? Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I guess besides Pacific, I think they're all private equity backed, so they've got funds. With Aspen's growth in the past year is kind of interesting, because even though they're de novo for the majority of the time they've been in existence, they did acquire ClearChoice. So they even pivoted during COVID, and they went to that implant focused practice model, at least with ClearChoice. So I can't say a lot of it is that they've been doing it for a long time. I think part of it is just the negotiating power that they have, which is huge. Whether it's on the supply side of things, whether it's on the real estate side of things, they're built for long term. I think some of the smaller DSOs, their model was to grow to a certain point and then find somebody to buy them out. And there's some others out there. I mean, I look at like there's North American Dental Group. They've been growing really quickly, and they've got support from the Swiss Jakob Holding and that family fund. So I think, and they also have Coliseum Dental over in Europe, which is kind of interesting. So you've got the North American platform, and then you've got I believe it's over 100 locations in Europe as well. So you've got Mid-Atlantic, which is kind of interesting, and where they might be around 350 locations. They've grown. They were small. They're based where we are outside of Philadelphia, and they had 16 locations. And about 3 years ago, they went and acquired Perfect Teeth out on the West Coast that had about 80 locations. And then soon after that, they acquired Dental One Partners, so that had 170 locations. So you had this little guy, gobbling up some of the bigger struggling platforms, right? At least certainly Perfect Teeth was. So, it's just really, it's kind of exciting to see what's going on in the space.
Yeah. Because we have a lot of entrepreneurs or CEOs of DSOs on our podcast as well. And while there are a lot of different paths you can go, kind of like a little bit of a reoccurring theme for some of them seems to be maybe your first location you start up yourself, or maybe you acquire it that's struggling, and then you might acquire some struggling locations at the beginning because you have some formula to help turn them around. And then you get to a point where you don't really want to, buy these ones that are going to take up a lot of time and energy. You want to buy the ones that are more successful. So you go for a little bit of a higher performing practice. Maybe it costs you more in terms of your multiple as well. But then there also, after that, comes a point where it's hard to find these larger locations that are very successful that fit in your niche. And then you've got to kind of start doing de novos if you want to keep your rate of growth. Have you kind of seen any sort of similarities in growth strategies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Off the top of my head, there are two DSOs, relatively small. It kind of had that same startup model where they were really good at buying fixer uppers, right, and helping them grow. One on the West Coast, one right here in Philadelphia, and then they kind of got to a point where they didn't want to do that anymore. But you're right. I mean, you've got. I think what happens is, and this really almost goes back to what your area of expertise, which is real estate, is you've got a lot of DSOs, especially the bigger, larger ones that have been around for a while. They want somebody that is doing $1.5 million in production and has, from a real estate standpoint, at least 5 operatories, and the location matters, and how much insurance they. So I think what you find is you've got this almost like this bidding war for these quality practices, and as these smaller groups scale up, you're right, they're all looking at the same practices that Smile Brands and Heartland and the others are looking at. So it becomes really difficult to be able to kind of unless your model is vastly different or there's some personality where you jive. Sometimes it just comes down to, do you have the money to spend?
Yeah, because when you're looking at a 6x, for a lot of these practices, if you're trying to acquire multiple of them, you need bank backing at the minimum, right? If not private equity backing. But so yeah, there comes a point where everybody has to take on some sort of debt or some sort of capital at some point. It's just a question of how long can you go independently until you've got to start taking that on, because the longer you can go, the more control you can maintain.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've all heard stories before of, the PE firm promises them, the DSO, that is the world, and nothing's going to change. And then that founder is gone within a year. So obviously things didn't work out. And so it's, you always hear that it's a marriage, right? So you have to make sure on both sides that things are vetted out, and because there are going to definitely be changes. But I really, I give a lot of the mid-sized groups credit for hanging in there and not taking any private equity funding, as long as they can. There are a lot out there that have 30, 40, 50 locations that are still, pretty much doing it on their own through bank debt.
Yeah, that's good. So do you consider I got 2 questions. First one is, how big is the dentistry market? The last statistic that I heard was about 90,000 dental offices in the US. Do you know if that's accurate?
That sounds about right. I've heard between 90 and 100,000, but that sounds right, because then there's how many are open, what they would consider full time, right? Which I think in the dental world is like 3.5 days a week. But yeah, I think it's around 90.
The golf course waits for no one.
Right. Although that changed, I think, with COVID. I think there was less golf being played, and more trying to make up for the 6 weeks that people have been shut down. Practices have been down.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then of those 90 to 100,000, what percentage of them do you think are, DSO owned or versus independently owned?
Wow, that's a great question. Again, I think it's how it's sliced and diced, right? Everybody has a different number. It's And I said I've been doing this for a while, and the number that's been kicked around for the past 7, 8 years has been anywhere from 17% to about 25%. So I was kind of going shoot in the middle and go 20. But it's everybody uses that percentage, and that was been like that for 8 years. It never moves. I'm like, it has to be more. I've seen some numbers. I saw from a relatively big investment banking firm, and they said 17%, but what they were looking at is the larger DSOs. So they're looking at the large groups or the ADSO members. I think when you kind of look at the emerging groups, so, and that could be, hey, doc, I've got 3 locations, right? That's how I think a lot of the distributors look at the smallest DSO platform. In other words, if you've got 3 locations, you qualify as a multi-site for the Henry Scheins, the Pattersons, the Benkos. So then that's a lot different than kind of just looking at the ADSO list and saying, okay, based on the ADSO members, it's 17%. So I think if you look at the emerging groups and then include all the national DSOs, the ADSO members, you could be looking at between 25 and I think I've heard almost close to 30%. So let's play it safe. Let's say 25.
Okay. And so, I mean, even with that statistic, obviously multiples are getting more expensive. The DSOs are getting competitive in who they're acquiring, but there's still a lot of room, for acquisition. Like the by far majority is still independently owned. Do you what other industries would you compare dentistry to?
It's interesting, Austin, because I told you when I got into the publishing game, I was working for a medical publisher. So they were in med surg, and they said that when they looked at dental to them was the way medical was 15 to 20 years ago. So, the consolidation hadn't happened. I don't, if you look at vision, I think vision, the consolidation's already happened. You look at pharmacies, that's already happened. We have CVS and Walgreens, and it's retail. So I think we've kind of have a little bit of insight as to what the industry is going to look like. The only question is, how long does it take to get there? Is it retail based? Does Walmart come in and continue to do what they're doing? Not sure about that. Or does medicine? Do we have these with that oral systemic connection? Do we have primary care physicians and dentists working more closely together? And you see a little bit about that in the Northeast with Pro Health and a couple of other groups on the West Coast as well. So I think it's going to consolidate. It's just a matter of, what does it look like? I'm not sure I know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I mean, we largely advocate for the retailization of healthcare, whether that be through dentistry or urgent care or vision, like you said. And they don't all have to be retail per se to be successful, obviously, but like with general dentistry, for the most part, you can really use your rent as a factor of your marketing. And so a lot of times people just don't understand that when you get a better location, when you have higher visibility, not only are you increasing your number of new patients, you're also increasing your return patients and just, for their follow-ups, and there's an overall patient flow. And so once you have those numbers of like how much it costs you to acquire a patient or to get a patient to return, then you've got a lot more clarity. You've got a lot more data around how much can I actually afford to spend on a better location. So, there's always exceptions to the rule. Like there's never like, everything is situational, but for the most part, like we really advocate for people putting a lot of effort into finding that right location, right? Like finding that retail location, because I mean, we've seen doctors where they 3x their rent, which is crazy. So if you're paying $3,000 and you go to 10 grand, I mean, it seems like an astronomical number in your head because you're multiplying it by 3. But in turn, their monthly revenue went up between 50 and 100%. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, well, now all of a sudden, $7,000 doesn't seem like that much. I mean, that's a pretty fixed amount, right? It's not going to, after that, it's not really going to raise that much. But when you can think about how much potential upside you have, then you really start to see the world through a different lens. And so, what we encourage people to do is just take your time looking through the data, looking through the analytics, and use somebody who really knows what they're doing. Like use somebody who's really an expert in the field. Obviously, we'd love it to be us. But it doesn't have to be us. What we don't like saying is when people just use their golfing buddy and their brother-in-law and somebody who they just want to throw a bone to help them, because it's like, it's gonna hurt you and me, and it's such an important decision. And you don't want to, if you have to relocate or if you pick the wrong decision, I mean, you could really, really be out of luck. So we always advocate for like, hey, pick somebody who's at least done 10 deals in the industry. You know what I mean? Whatever industry you're in, like try and get an expert. Like we all want to help people. We all want to be generous. We want to give people a helping hand, but it doesn't have to be for your business. You know what I mean? It could be for something else, because you pick the wrong location, you just might not ever recover from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point, and where some of the larger groups, have divisions that manage real estate. A lot of these smaller groups, are still, again, it's the doc founders, and it's certainly not an area of expertise. And I think as you start to scale up, you may be looking at, and then you start to get into de novo situations. And maybe you're looking at, instead of 5 operatories, maybe you're looking at 7, 8, 10. As you start to build, grow your business. And that's something that I think is out of a lot of emerging groups' wheelhouses for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's hard. It gets really hard for the founders, the CEOs in between 10 and 100 locations. It's just really awkward spot, because once you get to 100 locations, you can hire a lot of full-time guys. You can pay, thousands of dollars a month for all these subscriptions. You can pay 6 figures, multiple 6 figures for a real estate, full-time realtor, like broker or developer or whatever it is, to have under your housing. But up to that point, it doesn't really make sense. And so like the CEO is getting to spend a lot of time, even just the lease renewal process alone. I mean, that happens every 5 years, so that can really start to take up their time and their attention. And so that's where we see, like, a lot of people will reach out and they want help renegotiating leases, stuff like that, because there's just honestly not a whole lot of good options for people in that space.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit about some other things that you're doing. I know you're part of a DSO in Canada, and you're also on the board for Cure-mint. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm on the board of directors for a couple of different companies in the industry, which is kind of exciting, and spending a little bit of time with a startup DSO that is based in Canada and has some practices up there. And they are also in the midst of some LOIs in a couple states down in the U.S., which is interesting because obviously the rules are laws are quite a bit different down here in the States compared to Canada. And actually what's really interesting in Canada is the multiples are huge. So Canada is a much smaller market, obviously, and you only have you have really 2 large DSOs there. You have Dental Corp and you have 123 Dentist, and then Ultima's probably number 3. And then beyond that, it's a lot of these emerging groups. That's it. So you've got 2 big ones, 400, 300 locations, and then the rest are 5 to 25, 40 locations. But what's really interesting there in the States in general is a single practice may go for around, aside from EBITDA, around 75%, 70 to 75% of production, right? So if you're doing $1 million in production, you may get $600,000. You might get $700,000 for your practice in general. In Canada, it is 100% of production.
Wow.
So what you find up there is a lot of these smaller groups who cannot afford to pay 100% of production. So again, these larger DSOs, kind of back to your point about how the big ones are growing so quickly. Well, they have the money, so they can overpay for these quality practices in Canada. But you see a lot of de novos being started in Canada because the emerging groups don't want to pay for that one-time revenue, or even in some provinces, it's 1.25 time revenue, which is crazy. So it's just amazing the difference.
Yeah. What would that be? So 1.25 revenue, what would that equate to in terms of EBITDA, like a multiple?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I would say, if you looked at, we're looking at what, 5 to 6 times down here, depending, you may add another one-time EBITDA, which is,
So
it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is.
they'll pay 7 to 8 times of earnings, essentially.
Yeah.
That's a lot for a independent operator.
Yeah, it sure is. And part of it is inventory, right? And that's part of it. There just isn't the inventory up there. And those, again, I think when you look at things, it's always that you get paid the best for the best, whether it's a solo or whether it's a group. You need to have that magic number of 5 operatories minimum, right? And certainly location is important. whether it's geographic or whether it's from a retail standpoint. They love to be in retail space. But yeah, Canada's a little bit unique right now. I'm sure it'll cool down, but it's the consolidation isn't like it is here. So if we're at 20 to 25%, they might be at 10 to 15% up there.
And do you think that it's underserved in terms of the amount of dentists per population?
In Canada, yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to the way it is here in the States.
Okay. Okay. It's interesting that it's just that much more of a premium on practices.
Yeah.
So what like, and the one that you're on the board of, how many locations do you guys have currently?
Yeah, so can't really talk about it right now, but
Okay.
maybe that'll be part 2 of the
There you go.
podcast. If you want to bring me back, I'll have all sorts of good stuff to talk about
Okay.
shortly. Maybe we could talk a little bit about Cure-mint, which is kind of
Let's talk about
interesting,
Cure-mint.
the procurement platform. So I mean, I think that's one of the things that you can do from a DSO perspective to kind of separate yourself from the pack is, how you negotiate pricing for products. And so this organization that I'm on the board of, Cure-mint, based in Durham, North Carolina, they've got pretty revolutionary procurement platform, and they work with a lot of the DSOs, whether they're large DSOs or emerging groups. And the idea is you can kind of pull your formulary into their platform, and you can by location, see if people are complying with the formulary. And you don't have to actually build it out yourselves. You don't have to rely on a distribution partner to have that information. You can have go to companies that sell direct. You can go to the distribution partners and use the Cure-mint platform to kind of suck all that information in. And then, of course, like we all like in this space, is we like a lot of reports, right? So we can analyze everything by location and measure and make sure that they're not spending more in one location than they are in another.
Yeah, that's cool. And what got you into that? What's the story there?
Well, actually somebody reached out. Part of it is we've got a great reach online. So it was more somebody reached out at Cure-mint to us, or me, and wanted me on the board because I have connections in the DSO space. But what I thought was interesting and why I wanted to participate really was the interest from a couple VCs in the platform. And actually they got VC funding, Cure-mint did, right before COVID. It was like the last funding that this company did before, I think it was April. It was probably like April 15th before the world kind of shut down. But just exciting. I mean, I think really when you kind of look at where the growth is in the industry, in it, just about any industry, but it's really in the technology space, right? Whether it's clear aligners, or whether it's 3D imaging, or again, whether it's analytics, or how to create reports and analyze things. That to me is where the excitement is.
Yeah. So now for people listening, tell them, why would they want to subscribe to Group Dentistry Now? Like, what's the kind of value proposition there?
Well, I mean, I think for anybody in the industry, if you have an emerging group, or whether you're part of a large group, you could be a doc just maybe looking to either start their own DSO or possibly sell to a DSO someday. And we crank out, like we talked about earlier, a lot of content. We have 4 to 5 articles a week that are really just focused on the group practice and DSO space. So we talk about HR, we talk about procurement, we talk about real estate, we talk about legal. We kind of take a look at the DSO deals that have happened, who's hired who acquired who. So really just try and keep a finger on the pulse. We have our own podcast as well. So we make sure that we're constantly updating things, and it doesn't cost anything to subscribe. So there's a huge reason.
There you go. What's the name of the podcast?
It's called the Group Dentistry Now Show. You can just go to groupdentistrynow.com and you can find our podcast there, and a lot of it's video, so you can watch it, you can listen to it, but everything's on our website.
Okay, perfect. That was going to be my next question, is what's the best way for people to follow or get in touch?
Yep, groupdentistrynow.com, and you can find my contact info, Kim Larson's contact info there, all the podcasts, all the webinars we've done. There's no paywall, so everything's open. We share. We want everybody, to learn, and feel free to reach out. And if we can't help, we probably know somebody that can. So certainly if it's real estate, you don't need to reach out to us. You can just reach out to Austin. But if it's something beyond real estate, then, feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. Well, great. Bill, thanks so much for your time. I got that in the show notes. And this was really fun. So I look forward to connecting in the future and staying in touch.
Yeah. Thanks for Austin for having me on, and it's hopefully your listeners get a lot out of this, and I hope to see Austin and maybe some other listeners in person, because I think we'd all like to get out of the house or the office and get to a DSO or a dental show soon. So hopefully we'll do that.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to those in-person meetings again for sure. Have you guys
Excellent.
ever thought about hosting a conference?
Yeah, we've got one in the works in September. So it's on our website, September
Okay.
7th and 8th on the front end of the CDA North in San Francisco.
Oh,
For the
beautiful.
DSO Leadership Summit, and we're partnered with a company called HR for Health, who's been putting it on for about 7 or 8 years now.
Awesome. Yeah, well, good. I will check that out as well.
Excellent. I'd love
All
to
right.
have you there.